We turn now to the issue of extreme poverty in America. Census data show nearly 1 in 2 Americans have fallen into poverty or could be classified as low income. Meanwhile, more than a third of African American and Latino children live in poverty. Now, the Congressional Budget Office warns things could soon get worse if President Obama and Congress remain at an impasse over the 2013 fiscal budget. Republicans who control the House are calling for cuts to food aid, health care, and other social services, while protecting funds for the Pentagon. On Sunday, House Budget Committee Chairman Paul Ryan defended the Republican budget and sought to downplay the massive impact it would have if enacted.
What we're saying is let's get on growth and prevent austerity. The whole premise of our budget is to preempt austerity by getting our borrowing under control, having tax reform for economic growth, and preventing Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid from going bankrupt. That preempts austerity. The president, his budget, the fact the Senate hasn't done a budget in 3 years, puts us on a path toward European-like austerity. That's what we're trying to prevent from happening in the first place.
That was House Budget Committee Chair Paul Ryan. Some analysts say the Republicans' budget would actually add to the national debt. According to Economic Policy Institute, it would also increase the number of people who are looking for a job, resulting in a net loss of more than 4 million jobs over the next 2 years. For more, we're joined by Peter Edelman. He is a professor at Georgetown University Law Center, was top advisor to Senator Robert F. Kennedy, and also a member of President Bill Clinton's administration until he resigned in protest after Clinton signed the 1996 welfare reform legislation. Peter Edelman has a new book out. It's called So Rich, So Poor, Why It's So Hard to End Poverty in America. Peter Edelman, welcome to Democracy Now!
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here.
Why is it so hard to end poverty?
Because fundamentally, our economy has been very unkind to the entire bottom half of our people over the last 40 years. We have terrific public policy in place, although it's threatened now by Paul Ryan, as you just showed. But we've done a lot, from Social Security, Medicare and Medicaid, to food stamps and the Earned Income Tax Credit. We're keeping more than 40 million people out of poverty now by the public policy that we have. But that's fighting against the flood of low-wage jobs that we've had over the last 40 years, and the fact that people in the bottom half have been absolutely stuck, that the wages for people at the bottom have grown only 7% over that 40-year period. So we're fighting uphill with the public policies that we have. It's even harder for people which is single moms in this economy, who are all by themselves in this low-wage economy, trying to earn enough to support their children. It's very, very hard to do that with the flood of low-wage jobs that we have.
I want to ask about Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney. In February, he told CNN's Soledad O'Brien that he is not concerned with the poorest Americans.
I'm in this race because I care about Americans. I'm not concerned about the very poor. We have a safety net there. If it needs a repair, I'll fix it.
You just said, I'm not concerned about the very poor because they have a safety net. And I think there are lots of very poor Americans who are struggling who would say, that sounds odd. Can you explain that?
Well, you had to finish the sentence, Soledad. I said, I'm not concerned about the very poor that have a safety net, but if it has holes in it, I will repair them.
Got it. Okay.
The challenge right now, we will hear for the Democrat Party the plight of the poor, and there's no question it's not good being poor, and we have a safety net to help those that are very poor. But my campaign is focused on middle-income Americans. My campaign, I mean, you can choose where to focus. You can focus on the rich. That's not my focus. You can focus on the very poor. That's not my focus. My focus is on middle-income Americans.
That was Republican presidential candidate Mitt Romney. Peter Edelman, you talk about the issue of deep poverty at length in your book. So who are the very poor?
To say the least, Governor Romney doesn't know what he's talking about. We've had a terrible hole ripped in the safety net that we have for the lowest income people in this country. It's nice to hear him say if there's a problem, he's going to fix it. Not too credible, since he says he's not even focusing. But 20 million people now, and these are census numbers, live in deep poverty, extreme poverty, incomes below half the poverty line. That's below $9,000 for a family of 3. Why is that? Well, partly because the economy has been so weak at the bottom, but the most vulnerable people have lost the safety net of cash assistance. I'm talking about mothers and children, welfare. The 1996 law turned everything over to the states to do what they want. And basically right now, welfare is gone. We have 6 million people in this country whose only income is food stamps. That's an income at a third of the poverty line. In the state of Wyoming, there are 644 people in the whole state. 4% of the state's poor children receive TANF, temporary assistance to needy children, what we now call welfare. 19 states serve less than 10% of their poor children. It's a terrible hole in the safety net. Welfare has basically disappeared in large parts of this country.
The Clinton administration presided over a drastic transformation of U.S. welfare laws. I mean, people talk about the tremendous rift in Washington between Democrats and Republicans, but you might say on the issue of poverty, it's a kind of bipartisan affair, even to mention the word. But I want to go back to President Clinton. In 1996 at the welfare reform signing ceremony. This is when you served under him as Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, the signing ceremony in 1996.
But let's not obscure the fundamental purpose of the welfare provisions of this legislation, which are good and solid and which can give us at least the chance to end the terrible, almost physical isolation of huge numbers of poor people and their children from the rest of mainstream America. We have to do that.
So that was President Clinton when he signed welfare reform, and I'm sure you remember that day well. I spoke to you in November of 1996, soon after you resigned your post as Clinton's Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services. I think it was the first broadcast interview you did. You quit over in protest of the welfare bill. I want to go back to Democracy Now!, 1996.
I'm deeply opposed to the current welfare law and very troubled by what happened last year in the Congress. It ends a very fundamental entitlement of assistance to children in need. The way the law used to work, and this is completely ended, is that if a family with children satisfied the eligibility requirements, and those were national, federal requirements, they could get aid. What's happened now is it's entirely up to the state, each state, to decide whether it will help people at all, whether it will give them cash or help them with a voucher, whether it will have its system run by a public agency or by a corporation or some private agency.
So that was Assistant Secretary of Health and Human Services, well, former Assistant Secretary, because he had just quit. President Clinton signed off on welfare reform just before the election. You quit right after he was elected. How hard a decision was that for you? And, well, I'll ask the question I asked you then. Why did you wait so long? Why did you wait till President Clinton was reelected, given how extremely critical you were of what he had done?
That's not correct, Amy. I quit 2 weeks after he signed the bill, 2 months before the presidential election. Just so we're clear about that, you can go back and look at the New York Times. No, I did not wait, and I just couldn't continue. I simply disagreed, as the interview with you shows. It's turned out that exactly, I'm sorry to say, what I thought would happen has happened. We had 68% of children in poor families on the old welfare system. There was a lot wrong with the old welfare system. It needed to be fixed. It didn't help people to get off and find jobs. We had 14 million people. That's too many on welfare. But this was a blunderbuss. This was just an axe, a hatchet that was taken. And so that 68% then, with low benefits in a lot of places, but still legally entitled, as I told you in that interview, down to 27% now. That's just a tremendous, tremendous drop. It's fundamentally not there. And in this recession, when you would expect that it would be helpful to people, it turned out that there were 3.9 people on welfare, 3.9 million people on welfare at the beginning of the recession. It went up to 4.4 million. Now, food stamps, which worked beautifully in the recession, why? Because there's a legal right to it, went amazingly from 26.3 million people to 46 million now, almost 20 million more people on food stamps. Problem is, if you have no income, and now it's 6 million people who only have food stamps for their income, can't get the cash assistance, you get so much more terrible, deep, extreme poverty.
I mean, that's extraordinary figures that you cite. One of the things that you point out in your book is that states now practically have a disincentive to give cash assistance, to give welfare. Why is that?
States have complete, I'm sorry, the question is why?
States are practically given an incentive not to give cash assistance to the poor.
States have a block grant, so there's no legal right to it. And starting in the late 1990s, when the welfare rolls plummeted, the states actually found that they had money to spare. Instead of raising benefits or letting people who actually needed help get it, they pushed people away at the door. That's how they got the rolls down to about 4 million people from 14 million, and they started spending the money in other ways. So we come to the recession, and they're spending the money on other programs. They're spending money to support their child welfare system, a number of other programs, but they're not helping families that have desperate need. And that's because it's entirely up to them what they do with the money, as long as it stays in some way that's related to the question. But they don't have to extend a dollar of benefits to low-income people, and that's why we have such a tremendous diminution in the caseload.
The millions of people who only have food stamps—that's their only, if you could call it, income.
Yes,
it isn't?
yes. Jason DeParle did a fabulous piece of reporting 2 years ago in the New York Times, and these are government figures, but nobody had really gone and dug them up, and found that it's an astonishing number. Found that 6 million, 2% of our population have no income except those food stamps. The food stamps is the sole thing that stands between them and being totally without any income.
We're speaking with a guest who quit as a high-level official in the Clinton administration over welfare reform. That was, almost 20 years ago, but continues to deal with these issues with a new book, So Rich, So Poor, Why It's So Hard to End Poverty in America. We'll come back to Peter Edelman after break.